And welcome back! Today we are checking out a new game called Occupy Mars, which released into early access on the 10th of May. And developers Pyramid Games very kindly provided me with a review copy of it so I can check it out. I know I'm a little bit late on getting to this one, but I only got my review copy fairly recently. So if you're not sure about whether you want to buy it or not yet, then keep watching this video and hopefully it'll cover some of the points you want to find out about. But first things first, it is an early access game, so that means there's obviously going to be plenty of bugs and changes made to the game over the course of the next few weeks and months ahead. And obviously this means that the game could end up looking completely different to how it does now in say 6 months or even a year's time from now. So if you're still interested in the game, do try to keep your expectations realistic. I have seen a few other YouTubers who haven't had realistic expectations and completely trashed the game for no reason, when most of the issues they've had with the game have been their own doing really, but that's kind of outside the scope of the video for now. And the first major problem I have with the game, which I think a lot of people agree on, is that the introduction to the campaign is really long and extremely boring. Basically the game has you running all over the base like a headless chicken and doesn't actually teach you anything that would be useful to know about the survival aspects of the game. Instead you're just going from A to B, interacting with a few pretty pointless objects and elements, and talking to some fairly poorly designed NPCs. Kinda like watching any of my videos really. Okay, so it's not exactly all pointless, I guess. Maybe that was a little bit harsh, but it's not exactly useful to the early game either, because it's trying to teach you about items that aren't really going to be available to you until a little bit later on in the game. Now, I think what would have been far more helpful to you would have been maybe to have you build a solar power panel, hook it up to an ECU, and maybe have you build a well and hook that up to a pump as well. That would have certainly been more useful to you in the early game, because the early game is by far the most confusing part of the game to new players, I think. Now, by a long shot, the worst part of the campaign so far is this utterly detestable time section, where you're basically running through the pitch black corridors that are all broken down and the doors are wonky, they're not working properly, opening and closing on you, which just adds to the frustration. And on top of all that, you have a timer to deal with as well. And 2 different timers, in fact. It's a really miserable experience, and I don't think it needs to be in the game at all. I understand they probably added this to the game to add a little bit of drama and excitement, but it doesn't really come across that way to players at all, because it's just frustrating really. And I don't think a time section along with checkpoints as well, something I thought died out in the 90s, really fits all that well together in a survival game about Mars. So if you want to avoid all the nonsense at the start of the campaign, in my opinion the best way to play the game is by choosing one of the free play options, because that actually lets you choose your starting location and some of your starting equipment as well. Now, as for the graphics, they're certainly not terrible, but they're also not amazing either. There's certainly a lot of work that can be done to improve them, I think. For example, the NPC models look really quite atrocious. The hair is all blotchy and all that, and the skin is absolutely horrible, and that's true for the character customization as well. The sound is also another area that could use some improvement. It looks pretty cheap and low resolution, but in other areas the graphics actually hold up pretty well. For example, there's a lot of attention to detail gone into many of the machines and tools that you see, and some of the environments as well. So hopefully over time they can make the needed improvements to the graphics. Now, as for the gameplay itself, it's actually pretty fun when you eventually get to it, and I do think the game actually has some good potential here. There's a lot of depth to the game, there's so much stuff you can build, and there's a lot of different technologies you can research as well. But I will say I'm not a fan of the current blueprint system. I find it a little bit too grindy. I think they need to increase the drop rate for the abandoned tablets that you can find blueprints on. Because once you've explored around the immediate area where you start, you end up having to go further and further afield in order to find those blueprint tablets, which can be a bit of a problem if there's a one piece of technology that you need for your base, which you can only get via a blueprint, which, as you can imagine, is definitely going to slow down the mid to late game progress a little bit too much, I think. I'm not exactly sure what they could do to address the issue, but they definitely need to do something, I think. As far as what those changes could be, I'd definitely like to see what you guys think, so please do give me your ideas and suggestions in the comments. Maybe the devs might even read it, who knows. So, is Occupy Mars worth buying? Well, I suppose that depends on your perspective. If you're someone who enjoys a more hardcore survival experience, so managing your resources, planning things in advance, like what to spend your technology points on, building your base and things like that, then you'll probably enjoy the game. But if you prefer a more laid-back experience and you don't have to worry about things too much, then Occupy Mars probably isn't the game for you, because there's definitely a pretty big learning curve involved with the game. Having said that, I do feel as though the game does need a lot of polishing before I feel confident enough to recommend it to a wider audience, but I would definitely recommend that you keep an eye on development and perhaps pick it up on sale if you happen to see it at a reduced price later on down the road. But for now, I would perhaps say wait and see. So, do you already have the game, or are you going to wait a little while and see what the future brings for it? I would definitely like to hear your thoughts and opinions in the comments below, whether or not you agree with what I say. It's always interesting to see a different perspective on things. Before I wrap things up, I would like to once again say thank you to Pyramid Games for providing me with a review copy of the game to check out. If this video is received well, I will be considering making some more content for the game. I did notice there's certainly a lack of information out there about the game in general, so I'll see what I can do in terms of content, I suppose. With business out of the way, I would be very grateful if you would perhaps consider abusing the like button. And if you're feeling a little bit more generous, maybe harassing the subscribe button too, down the bottom right corner there. It really would help me out a lot. So, thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you all again very soon. Rocky, what did I tell you about leaking hydraulic fluid all over the carpet? Honestly, why do you think I never take you inside?